That has been zoomed in. We don't like that.
It's fine. Okay, I have to. This is filming the whole time. 3 minutes of nonsense. Hello and welcome back to my studio. Today we're going to be making a cloche design that I've called the Summer Crush, and we're going to be dyeing and shaping and decorating. So I hope you get yourself a cup of tea and a cookie and sit down and we will have some fun. I'm using Toyo, which is a Japanese product that's been around for over 100 years now, and it's actually a paper product, and traditionally it is usually lacquered, but I get unlacquered Toyo, which will receive dye really well, which is why you saw me soak it so it receives the dye evenly. Now here I am attempting to make a dye bath with not the right color of dye because I'm trying to make a pink, and I started with the wrong color. It came out way too sweet of a pink. You'll see me, I keep adding, and I keep testing with pieces of white paper, which is a little trick I learned a long time ago. So I'm trying to make a very light pink, but because the base color of this particular pink was too intense, this was called peony, and it was too sweet of a color, too intense of a color, and eventually I just sort of kind of guessed, as I often do, and it ended up being far too bright. What I decided to do after I dyed it and dried it is I put it in a very weak bath of bleach and water to take some of the dye out. And now I've done that before, and I do it very slowly and very delicately because it doesn't necessarily do it even. So again, you'd have to wet it, but with cold water, and put it into a cold bath. This is a hot bath of water. You also see me, I'm adding a little bit of tan in attempts to cut the pinkness of it, which didn't work at all. So, you know, I'm pretty much lying to myself at this point that I got the right color, but they didn't have the right color, and we've been going in and out of lockdown and in and out of the ability to buy things at stores. So eventually I just said, well, if it's the wrong color, I'll bleach it out and start again. So it's really important when you dye anything to thoroughly mix it, and then I use some old dishes to keep it weighted because of course it's paper, so it wants to float to the surface. I leave it for 30 minutes, I turn it all the way around, turn it inside out, agitate it some more, and put it back in for another 30 minutes. So like all dyeing, it's really important to rinse it. I was trying to get to a pale pink. Everything wet is a little darker when you dye it, so you really have to wait until it's dry. Thoroughly rinse it until no more dye comes out. Of course, it's paper, so it's not completely even, but it's even enough. So here I am, I wet the one side, I'm turning it over, and then I wet the other side. So it's thoroughly saturated, but not completely soaked. And that is the gel. I like to use it warm, and I brush it on. You can sponge it on, you can spray it on, but then it tends to set in the sprayer, which makes it very difficult to clean afterwards. So I just use this really inexpensive plastic bristle brush from the dollar store. I find it really effective. Now, I'm trying to thoroughly coat it in the gel, which is sticky and it's wet, and get it all over, because then what I'm going to do is use my steamer. And for this one I'm using a clothing steamer because I can use the wand up against it. If you have a Jiffy steamer, you can get a wand attachment for that as well. I was using my old school millinery steamer. I'd have to pick it up off, I'd have to pick the block up off the spinner and then hold it over. And I mean, that's fine, but I decided to start using my clothing steamer. And what I'm doing there is, because paper is a natural product, the same as when I'm doing something in straw or wool, it's the steam is opening up the fibers of the paper even farther and forcing the gel fixative into the fibers. It also, in a little bit of way with this gel, one kind of cooks it a little bit. So I'm doing some rolling of the brim. This is a close shape, which originally I had taken the idea from a photograph of hats available for sale, and I'm not sure which catalog it was. It shows up on Pinterest a lot, and I've done it a few times now. Each one's a bit different, but I follow the same kind of pattern. Kind of roll it up, because the edges of it are a little bit raw, but I don't want to cut them because it'll start to unweave. That's also the point where I discovered that I needed to hammer it in because this is a hardwood block. So then I went back to it and tacked the pins in. These are stainless steel millinery pins, which I got from the same source that I get my hydrolac from, which is in the States, but there are lots of sources all over the world. Wherever you live, you can get them. They're very heavy to ship. If you can buy them in person, it's great. If you have shipping, I know Canadian shipping is really expensive. So if you can find them where you can just pick them up, that's great. I bought these when our dollar was par with American dollar, so I wasn't paying an extra 30% on top of everything I purchased from the States. So as you can see, I'm just fussing with it, deciding, because it's very wet, it doesn't hold any of its shape. So I'm just fussing with it and deciding how I'm going to do my pleats, how I'm going to do my folds. I've hidden the raw edges. That way I don't have to bind them, because they're woven so they don't come apart, but they're not really pretty. And again, this is if I haven't mentioned it before, this is a hood shape as opposed to a capeline shape or a capeline shape. So it's very close. It doesn't allow you to have a wide brim. It's a very close fitting brim. You can, however, shape this into just a crown shape. You can cut it, stitch it so it doesn't unravel, and then add it to a brim of your choice. Now that I'm near the end of shaping, I'm going to leave this to dry for a couple of days, kind of depends, but I usually like to leave it for a couple of days since I don't have a dryer to get it right into all of the many layered places so it's nice and dry. And then I can take all the pins out and start making it pretty. So I'm doing a ribbon flower technique that I learned from a book by Candace Kling, and I will list it below so you can find it for yourself. I'm pretty sure it's still in print. It's a pretty straightforward technique. I take lengths of satin ribbon and I tie a little knot at the apex of the loops, and I'm doing 2 different widths of ribbon just to add some more dimension, and I cut them and put a little dab of glue to keep them in place. And then what I'm doing is I put a little dab of glue in where the center is, and then a pin, because I use a styrofoam head, just to keep it in place so I can see what I'm doing. And I build it around the actual shape of the hat rather than building a flower separate and then trying to attach it to a hat. So now that I'm finished the flower, I'm taking long lengths and tucking them in to cover the ends. Just didn't decide what I'm going to do here. I want it to look like there's tails coming off. So I give it a snip and then I tie a knot because it looks nice and neat. Of course, I didn't get it in the right spot, so I try again, get it in the right spot. And I just kind of tuck it to make it look like it came from the flower. And then I also do, I think 3 of them. I do a couple more that go up and over the crown of the hat. This is a very 1920s style where there's tails of things going up and over. The 20s were a little bit more graphic. Basically, I just sit and I play with this until I get it the way I like, and I kind of pin everything in place before I start fixing things more permanently. And you can see me, what looks like terribly arbitrary decisions, but it's a lot of practice. So everywhere where there was a pin is hand stitched to the hat. This particular one I go all the way through just for security. And that means there won't be any glue failure and everything will stay in place nice and neatly. Tiny little stitches. I usually catch the edges of the ribbon because it has a slightly bound edge that you can hide your stitch. Or I go through the knot. Okay, the last step of this flower is the knotted center. So I'm taking a slightly wider ribbon out of the two sizes. It's the wider one, and I just make simple overhand knots. Sometimes people call them granny knots. I don't pull them too tightly. I want them to be fat, and I'm sort of making a knot and then a little bit of space and then a knot and a little bit of space, and this just took practice to figure out how to do it, and the tightness of the knot is determined by the thickness of the ribbon. So the wider the ribbon, you're going to want probably a looser knot, and the smaller the ribbon, you might want a tighter knot. And so I do several of these. I usually do an odd number because odd numbers are generally pleasing when it comes to any sort of placements, ribbon work, but most things, odd numbers are really pleasing when it comes to any sort of composition. And when it's all finished, I wind it around into a disc shape. I don't do it really, really tightly. You can see I tested it and I have to add a few more knots. I don't do it really, really tightly, and that just lets me determine what the center is going to be. This is the center of that flower I made. And then I stitch it into place. See me doing a quilter's knot there, because I do a lot of hand sewing. So then I stitch it into place. I usually fold back the ribbon tail, determine what is the best side of the knot, and then I just do a couple quick stitches. So then I stitch it in place just with a couple loose stitches, and I bury the ends underneath the back. And once it's all finished, and I like it, I put some glue on the back of it and I press it firmly over top of all of my cut ends from my flower. Just hold it in place and the flower is finished. And I just have a few more steps. For some completely unknown reason, I decided to hand stitch the label on to a piece of felt. I usually machine stitch it. I don't know why. I was in a hand sewing mood, I guess. I fix it in place. And generally to denote where the back of a hat is, because sometimes cloches aren't really that easily known, I put a little satin bow at the center back of all of my hats that are not cut and sew hats, so hats like these. Hi, and welcome back to the studio. No, you haven't left the studio. I've left the studio because I'm upstairs. I hope you enjoyed watching me put together the summer crush. This is it here. This is Veronica, my 1920s mannequin head. She's got a rough bottom, but I just wanted to show you before we're done for the day how actually really soft this hat can be. So I'm not going to put it on because this is for a client, so I'm not going to put it on. Put it back on Veronica. Here we go. There we go. So, I hope you enjoyed watching me put this together. If you want to watch me make more things, please join me again next time I post. And if you subscribe, then you'll know when I post. And comment and like, and we'll see you next time. Bye. 2, 3. Hello. Hi. Hi. Oh, fuck. Stop. This is so hard. The checklist. This is like a quick intro. All bloopers. No content.